The bitter January wind cut through Jake's thin jacket as he stumbled down Mason Street, his vision blurring from hunger. His last piece of bread, the only food he'd had in 2 days, was now in the hands of a homeless man huddled against the convenience store wall. The man's grateful eyes haunted Jake's thoughts as he took another unsteady step. Behind him, the echo of his sister Anna's morning tears still rang in his ears. "I'm hungry, Jake," she had whispered, her small hands clutching her empty stomach. Their mother Susan had already left for her 3rd job, leaving only a note promising she'd try to bring something home. The rent was due tomorrow, and Jake knew every penny would go to their ruthless landlord, Mr. Harrison. The world tilted sideways as Jake's knees buckled. The cracked pavement rushed up to meet him, but before he hit the ground, strong hands caught his shoulders. Through the haze, Jake looked up to see a silhouette against the grey winter sky, the same homeless man he'd just helped, now supporting him with surprising strength. "Easy there, son," the man's voice was gentle, cultured, nothing like what Jake had expected. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in standing alone, but in letting others help you up. As consciousness slipped away, Jake saw something familiar in the man's eyes, something that reminded him of his father's photograph, the one his mother kept hidden in her dresser drawer. If you found value in this emotional story about kindness and resilience, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories that touch hearts and inspire positive change. Together, we can spread hope and remind others that kindness matters. Thank you for being part of our storytelling journey. The Thompson family lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, where paint peeled from the walls and winter drafts whistled through poorly sealed windows. Susan Thompson, a former accountant turned cleaning lady, worked 3 jobs to keep her children fed. Her hands, once soft from office work, had grown calloused from scrubbing floors and washing dishes at the local diner. The proud woman who had graduated with honors now spent her evenings cleaning offices, her shoulders hunched under the weight of unpaid bills and mounting debts. Jake, her 14-year-old son, had inherited his mother's determination and his late father's gentle heart. Since David Thompson's death 5 years ago, a tragic car accident that left the family without insurance money, Jake had become the man of the house. He woke each morning at dawn to help his mother get 8-year-old Anna ready for school, carefully dividing their meager breakfast to ensure his sister got the bigger portion. The family's struggles had deepened in recent months. Susan's health had begun to fail, though she tried to hide her persistent cough and the way she pressed her hand against her side when she thought no one was watching. Medical bills joined the stack of overdue notices on their kitchen table, each one stamped with angry red letters. The electricity had been cut off twice already this winter, forcing them to huddle together under threadbare blankets during the coldest nights. Jake's school life had become a daily exercise in hiding their poverty. He wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, carefully washing them by hand each night. His notebooks were filled to the margins, every page used front and back to save paper. Lunch hours were spent in the library, claiming homework as an excuse to avoid the cafeteria, where his empty lunchbox would raise questions. The weight of their situation showed in the little things, the way Susan's hands shook as she counted coins for bus fare, how Jake automatically checked every vending machine's return slot for forgotten change, and how Anna had stopped asking for new crayons despite her passion for drawing. Their dinner conversations had become exercises in optimism, each family member finding small victories to share a good grade on Jake's math test, extra $1 in tips for Susan, or a gold star on Anna's artwork. But it was the recent letter from their landlord, Mr. Harrison, that had pushed them to the brink. The rent would be increasing by 30% next month, an impossible sum for their already stretched budget. Susan had pleaded for mercy, offering to clean the building's common areas in exchange for a smaller increase. Harrison's response had been cruel. "This isn't a charity, Mrs. Thompson. Either pay the new rate or find somewhere else for your brats to live." That night, Jake had found his mother crying in the kitchen, illuminated by their last working light bulb. The letter lay crumpled on the table, and beside it sat a small velvet box, the one that held her wedding ring. "I'm sorry," she had whispered when she saw him, quickly wiping her eyes. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart. We'll figure something out." But Jake had seen the classified ads circled in the newspaper cache for gold highlighted in desperate pencil marks. In their small bedroom, Anna slept peacefully, unaware of the crisis looming over their family. Her stuffed bear, a last gift from their father, was clutched tightly in her arms, its fur worn thin from years of tears and hugs. On the wall above her bed hung dozens of her drawings, each one depicting their family holding hands, smiling, standing in front of a house with a red door and flowers in the window. It was Anna's dream house, the one she believed they would have when things get better. Jake stood in the doorway, watching his sister sleep, making a silent promise to protect her from the harsh realities of their world. Tomorrow would bring another day of challenges, of hiding their struggles, of finding ways to keep hope alive. But for now, in the quiet darkness of their apartment, Jake allowed himself to feel the full weight of their situation, his young shoulders carrying burdens no child should have to bear. Mr. Richard Harrison stood 6 feet tall, with cold grey eyes that seemed to calculate profits with every glance. His tailored suits and polished shoes marked him as a man of wealth, but the cruelty in his thin-lipped smile revealed the ruthless methods behind his success. From his corner office in the Harrison Properties building, he controlled dozens of low-income apartments across the city, each one a source of misery carefully disguised as opportunity. The tenants whispered about his tactics, how he would schedule inspections during work hours, then fine those who couldn't be present, how repairs would mysteriously lead to additional charges, how complaints would result in sudden rent increases. His son, Bradley Harrison, walked the halls like a prince, pointing out infractions with the same cruel delight his father took in evicting families. Harrison had a particular disdain for the Thompsons. Perhaps it was Susan's quiet dignity that irritated him, or Jake's protective stance whenever he approached their door. More likely, it was the fact that their apartment, with its prime location near the developing downtown area, could command triple the rent from more desirable tenants. He had been systematically pushing out the building's original residents, replacing working families with young professionals who didn't question the arbitrary fees or notice the black mold behind fresh paint. His latest scheme involved a series of building improvements, superficial changes that justified steep rent increases. The Thompsons' apartment building was his last holdout in the area, and their unit was one of the few still occupied by the original tenants. Harrison had already started the pressure missing maintenance requests, delayed responses to emergencies, and increasingly hostile inspections. The breaking point came when Harrison discovered Susan's second job at the diner where he often lunched with real estate developers. The sight of her in a waitress uniform, serving coffee with trembling hands, had sparked a particularly vindictive pleasure. He'd made a show of examining his silverware for spots, sending back his perfectly cooked meal and leaving a complaint with the manager about unhygienic staff. His reputation in the business community was untouchable. Local politicians enjoyed generous donations from Harrison Properties, and city inspectors found their pockets lined with cash after overlooking code violations. Even the local newspaper had buried stories about tenant complaints after Harrison threatened to pull his advertising. Bradley Harrison, at 17, was learning his father's trade well. He took particular pleasure in tormenting Jake at school, where their paths crossed in the hallways of Roosevelt High. The expensive watch on Bradley's wrist cost more than 6 months of the Thompsons' rent, a fact he loved to point out while shoving Jake into lockers or knocking books from his hands. The father-son duo had recently devised a new plan to force the remaining tenants out. They would cite a false bedbug infestation, require all residents to pay for expensive treatments, and use any non-payment as grounds for eviction. The notice would go out next week, giving families like the Thompsons an impossible choice: find money they didn't have or find themselves homeless. Harrison kept meticulous records of his machinations in a leather-bound ledger locked in his office safe. Each page detailed a family broken, a dream crushed, a profit made. The Thompsons occupied several pages, their struggles documented with clinical precision, late payments highlighted in red, complaints filed away with dismissive notes, and Susan's desperate pleas transcribed with mocking commentary. What Harrison didn't know was that his empire stood on shakier ground than he realized. His years of corruption had left a trail, and not everyone he'd stepped on had remained silent. Among the homeless people he sneered at daily was one man who watched and waited, gathering evidence with the patience of someone who understood that justice, like revenge, was a dish best served cold. In his high-rise office, Harrison reviewed the Thompson file one last time before signing the eviction notice. Outside his window, the city sprawled before him like a kingdom, while in the streets below, lives hung in the balance of his signature. A thin smile crossed his face as he pressed pen to paper, unaware that his next encounter with the Thompsons would set in motion events that would bring his carefully constructed world crashing down. Roosevelt High School loomed like a fortress of social hierarchy, its brick walls containing a world where worth was measured by brand names and bank accounts. For Jake Thompson, each day was a careful dance of avoidance and pretense. He'd perfected the art of disappearing, sliding past the cafeteria during lunch, finding the quietest corners of the library, becoming invisible when Bradley Harrison and his wealthy friends prowled the halls. Only Mark Anderson, a middle-class student with a part-time job at the local grocery store, saw through Jake's carefully constructed walls. Their friendship had begun a year ago when Mark caught Jake picking up discarded apple cores from the cafeteria trash. Instead of mockery, Mark had offered half his sandwich and a quiet understanding that came from his own experiences with a single mother struggling to make ends meet. Mark became Jake's shield in the hostile environment of Roosevelt High. He'd casually block Bradley's path when the bully approached, share his textbooks when Jake couldn't afford them, and create distractions when teachers asked about missing homework assignments. Their friendship was built on unspoken understanding and small acts of kindness that made survival possible. The social dynamics at Roosevelt were brutal in their clarity. Students like Bradley Harrison occupied the top tier, their expensive cars filling the best parking spots, their designer clothes setting trends others couldn't afford to follow. The middle ground belonged to students like Mark, neither rich nor poor enough to draw attention. Then there were the invisible ones like Jake, whose poverty made them targets for ridicule and isolation. Teachers turned a blind eye to the bullying, aware that the Harrison family's donations funded many school programs. When Bradley accidentally spilled coffee on Jake's only winter coat, the principal merely suggested Jake should be more careful about where he walked. When Jake's art project, a carefully crafted sculpture he'd worked on for weeks using salvaged materials, was destroyed, the teacher simply marked it as incomplete. Despite these challenges, Jake maintained his dignity and even excelled in his studies. His math teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, secretly left granola bars in his desk after noticing how his hands shook during morning classes. The school librarian, Mr. Peterson, would conveniently forget to charge late fees when Jake needed extra time with textbooks he couldn't afford to buy. The worst moments came during class discussions about family vacations or weekend plans. Jake would sit silently, unable to contribute stories about movies he couldn't see or restaurants he'd never visit. His classmates' casual mentions of allowances larger than his family's monthly income felt like personal attacks, though he knew they weren't intended that way. In art class, Jake's talent shone through despite his limited supplies. He created masterpieces with stubby pencils and borrowed paper, his drawings often depicting scenes of hope and resilience. His art teacher, Ms. Martinez, recognized his gift and quietly supplied him with extra materials, claiming they were leftovers that would otherwise be thrown away. Through it all, Mark stood by him, a steady presence that made school bearable. They shared dreams on the walk home, Mark's plans to become a mechanic, Jake's hope of someday being able to help other families like his own. Their friendship was proof that kindness could exist even in the harshest environments, that not everyone judged worth by the price of one's clothes or the size of one's house. But as winter deepened and the Harrisons' pressure on Jake's family intensified, even this friendship would be tested. The coming weeks would reveal who truly stood by their principles when facing difficult choices, and what loyalty meant in a world where money often spoke louder than truth. On a grey Tuesday morning, Mr. Harrison's ultimatum arrived in the form of a certified letter. Susan Thompson's hands trembled as she opened the envelope at her kitchen table, the morning light casting harsh shadows across her exhausted face. The letter was typed on expensive letterhead, each word a calculated blow to their already fragile existence. Dear Mrs. Thompson, due to necessary building improvements and market adjustments, your monthly rent will increase by 75% effective immediately. Additionally, a mandatory pest control treatment fee of $2,000 is required within 72 hours. Failure to comply with either requirement will result in immediate eviction proceedings. The letter continued with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats, but Susan could read no further. Her coffee grew cold as she calculated and recalculated impossible numbers. Even working around the clock, she couldn't generate the required funds in 3 days. The current rent already consumed most of her income, leaving barely enough for food and Anna's medications. Jake found her still sitting there when he emerged from the bedroom he shared with Anna. One look at her face told him everything. Without a word, he picked up the letter, his young face hardening as he read. The amount demanded was more than their entire family had seen in months. Behind him, Anna appeared in her worn pajamas, clutching her teddy bear, too young to understand but old enough to sense the tension in the room. Mum Jake's voice cracked slightly. We can't let him do this. There must be something. Susan wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile for Anna's benefit. Go get ready for school, sweetheart. Everything will be fine, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her certainty that nothing would be fine. That afternoon, Mr. Harrison made a personal appearance at their door, his expensive cologne filling the narrow hallway. His grey suit was immaculate, his smile predatory as he towered over Susan. I trust you received my letter, Mrs. Thompson. I thought I'd stop by personally to discuss your options. His eyes roamed over their apartment, taking in the patched furniture and worn carpet with obvious disdain. Of course, if the new terms are too challenging, I know several excellent homeless shelters that might be more appropriate for your situation. Susan stood straighter, summoning the last remnants of her dignity. The lease agreement you signed gives us protection from such dramatic increases. What you're doing isn't legal, Mr. Harrison. His laugh was cold, echoing off the walls. Legal? My dear Mrs. Thompson, I own half the judges in this city, but please feel free to pursue legal action with whatever pennies you have left. I'm sure your children won't mind sleeping in a car while you fight a losing battle. As if on cue, Anna's cough echoed from the bedroom, the same cough that had been getting worse since the heating was reduced to save money. Harrison's smile widened. Sounds like little Anna might need another visit to the doctor. Shame if anything were to happen because you couldn't afford proper medical care. But the threat hung in the air like poison. Susan's hands clenched at her sides, her face pale but determined. Get out of my home, Mr. Harrison. Your home, he chuckled, reaching out to brush an imaginary speck from his sleeve. I believe you mean my property. You have 72 hours, Mrs. Thompson. Not a minute more. And do remember, accidents happen all the time in buildings this old. It would be tragic if any harm came to your precious children because of faulty wiring or gas leaks. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Susan clutching the doorframe for support. She didn't know that Jake had heard every word from his hiding place around the corner, his hands balled into fists, tears of rage and helplessness burning in his eyes. That night, after Anna was asleep, Jake found his mother's wedding ring in a pawn shop envelope, along with their family photos and his father's watch, the last valuable possessions they owned. The sight broke something inside him. His mother had always protected him, now it was his turn to find a way to protect her. Tomorrow he would walk to school in the bitter cold, his stomach empty, his resolve hardened by desperation. And on that walk, fate would place him on a collision course with a seemingly homeless man whose appearance would change everything, though not in any way Jake could possibly imagine. The morning air bit through Jake's thin jacket as he made his way to school, his empty stomach cramping from hunger. The pawn shop receipt in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, all their family treasures traded for a fraction of Harrison's demanded payment. His mother's wedding ring alone should have been worth more, but desperate people couldn't bargain. That's when he first saw him, an elderly man huddled against the wall of Miller's convenience store, his grey beard matted, clothes tattered but surprisingly clean. Something about the man's posture caught Jake's attention. Despite his apparent homelessness, he sat with a strange dignity, his back straight against the cold brick wall. Jake hesitated. In his pocket was his entire lunch, a single slice of bread saved from yesterday's loaf. It wasn't much, barely enough to quiet his own hunger, but the way the old man's hands trembled from cold stirred something in his memory. His father used to say that true character showed in how you treated others when you had nothing left to give. "Excuse me," Sir Jake's voice was barely above a whisper as he approached. The man looked up and Jake was struck by his eyes, sharp, intelligent, and somehow familiar. Would you like some bread?" The man studied Jake for a long moment, his gaze taking in the worn shoes, the frayed jacket, the obvious signs of poverty. "You don't have much yourself, son," he said, his voice surprisingly cultured. "Why offer it to a stranger?" Jake swallowed hard, fighting back tears of exhaustion and hunger. "Because my sister had nothing for breakfast this morning and I couldn't help her, but maybe I can help you." The man's expression softened. "What's your name, young man?" Jake Thompson." Something flickered in the man's eyes, recognition, but it passed so quickly Jake thought he'd imagined it. The man held out his hand, weathered but clean. "Walter, my name is Walter." Jake placed the bread in Walter's outstretched hand, noticing how the man's fingers were free of dirt despite his apparent situation. Walter broke the bread in half, offering a portion back. "Share it with me." Jake shook his head. "Please take it all. I need to get to school anyway." Walter wrapped the bread carefully in a surprisingly clean handkerchief. "Sometimes, Jake, the greatest gifts come from those who have the least to give. Tell me, why are you so hungry? Is there no food at home?" The question was gentle, but it broke something in Jake. Before he knew it, he was telling Walter everything: the landlord's threats, his mother's exhaustion, Anna's worsening cough, the pawned wedding ring. The words poured out like a river, carrying years of pain and worry. Walter listened intently, his eyes growing harder with each detail about Harrison's tactics. He asked careful questions about dates, amounts, specific threats made. Jake was too caught up in finally sharing his burden to notice how Walter's questions seemed focused and purposeful, or how he occasionally made subtle notes in a small notebook that appeared from his ragged coat. "Harrison Properties," Walter mused, his tone carrying an edge Jake couldn't quite identify. "Richard Harrison has quite a reputation in this town." "You know him?" Jake asked, surprised. Walter's smile was mysterious. "I know many things about Mr. Harrison that he'd prefer stayed hidden. But tell me more about your family, Jake. Your father, what happened to him?" Jake's throat tightened. "Car accident, 5 years ago. They said it was brake failure, but we couldn't afford to investigate. Mr. Harrison bought our old house at auction right after said Dad had taken a second mortgage we didn't know about." Walter's hand clenched briefly, his knuckles whitening. "Brake failure," he repeated softly, his voice carrying a weight Jake couldn't understand. "And Harrison acquired your house. How?" "Convenient for him." The school bell rang in the distance, making Jake jump. "I'm late. I'm sorry, I have to go." "Of course," Walter said, rising with surprising grace for a supposedly homeless man. "Thank you for the bread, Jake, and for sharing your story. Perhaps we'll meet again soon." As Jake hurried away, he didn't see Walter pull out a phone from beneath his ragged coat, nor hear him speak quietly into it, "Find everything we have on David Thompson's accident, and get me Harrison's banking records from that year. It's time we ended this." The bread Jake had given away would prove to be more than just an act of kindness. It was the key that would unlock a chain of events leading to justice long delayed. But for now he ran to school, his stomach empty but his heart somehow lighter for having shared his burden, unaware that the mysterious Walter was much more than he appeared to be. That evening Jake's sacrifice began to take its toll. His hands shook as he tried to complete his homework, the words swimming before his eyes. The hunger had moved beyond mere discomfort, becoming a gnawing pain that made it hard to think. His mother noticed his pallor at dinner, where he pretended to eat the small portion of soup while secretly sliding most of it into Anna's bowl. "Jake, you're not eating," Susan whispered after Anna had gone to bed. "I saw what you did with your soup." "I'm fine, Mom. I had a big lunch," he lied, avoiding her eyes. The guilt of deception weighed heavily, but not as heavily as the thought of his family's suffering. The next morning brought unexpected consequences. As Jake walked his usual route to school, he noticed something different. The spot where Walter had sat was empty, but a small paper bag rested against the wall. His name was written on it in elegant handwriting that seemed out of place in their rundown neighborhood. Inside he found a carefully wrapped sandwich, an apple, and a note: "Kindness deserves kindness in return. Watch for me, Jake. Things are about to change." The handwriting was the same as on the bag, but something about its precision made Jake pause. This wasn't the scrawl of a homeless man. At school, the day took a darker turn. Bradley Harrison cornered him in the hallway, his expensive watch glinting as he shoved Jake against the lockers. "Heard my dad paid your family a visit," he sneered. "Better start packing, charity case. Those shelters fill up fast in winter." Mark stepped in, his normally friendly face hard with anger. "Back off, Bradley. Money can't buy class. Your family proves that every day." The confrontation drew a crowd, students gathering to watch the drama unfold. Bradley's face reddened with rage. "At least my dad's alive to pay bills," he spat at Jake. "Unlike yours, who was stupid enough to drive with bad brakes." Jake's vision went red. For the first time in his life, he launched himself at a bully, his fist connecting with Bradley's jaw. The bigger boy staggered back, more surprised than hurt. What followed was chaos, a flurry of fists, shouts, and finally teachers pulling them apart. In the principal's office, the disparity in their worlds became painfully clear. Bradley sat with his father, Mr. Harrison's expensive suit and cold smile, a stark contrast to Jake's solitary presence. His mother couldn't leave work. A single missed shift could mean no electricity next week. Given Mr. Harrison's generous contributions to our school, the principal began, nervously adjusting his tie, and considering Bradley's clean record, "We'll consider this a misunderstanding. However, Jake, any further violent incidents will result in immediate expulsion." "He insulted my dead father," Jake protested, his voice breaking. Perhaps Mr. Harrison interjected smoothly. "If your father had been more responsible with his finances, you wouldn't be so sensitive about your situation." Jake stared at Harrison, seeing something in his smile that made his blood run cold. The accident, the mysterious second mortgage, Harrison buying their house, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, began shifting in his mind. Walking home that afternoon, suspended for 3 days, despite Bradley receiving no punishment, Jake's world felt like it was crumbling. The suspension meant he'd miss his weekly math test, the one subject where his grades had remained strong enough to keep his dream of a scholarship alive. He found himself back at the convenience store wall, looking for Walter, needing someone to talk to who might understand. Instead, he found another note: "Look deeper into your father's accident. Harrison Properties acquired 7 homes that year through similar accidents. Stay strong, Jake. Justice takes time, but it comes to those who deserve it." The note left him with more questions than answers. Who was Walter really? How did he know about the other accidents? And why did he seem so interested in the Harrisons? At home, Jake found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, her face in her hands. An eviction notice lay before her, dated 2 days earlier than Harrison's promised deadline. They had less than 24 hours to pay or leave. Mum, Jake started, but Susan raised her hand, stopping him. "The pawn shop money isn't enough," she whispered. "Not even close. I don't know what we're going to do." Outside their window, snow began to fall, the first flakes of a winter storm that would change everything. Somewhere in the city, Walter was setting plans in motion that would shake the Harrison empire to its foundations. But for now, the Thompsons faced their darkest hour, unaware that Jake's simple act of sharing bread with a stranger had already set wheels of justice turning. The revelation came during the worst snowstorm of the year. The Thompson family huddled in their apartment, watching wet snow pile against their windows while the heating sputtered and failed another of Harrison's maintenance issues. Anna's cough had worsened in the cold, each bark sending shivers of worry through Susan and Jake. A knock at the door startled them. Through the peephole, they saw a man in an expensive overcoat, his silver hair neatly trimmed, his bearing aristocratic. Susan's hand trembled as she opened the door, expecting another of Harrison's threats. Instead, they found themselves face to face with Walter, but not the homeless Walter Jake had met. This Walter stood straight and commanding, his transformation complete. Gone were the ragged clothes and matted beard, replaced by the polished appearance of old money and power. His eyes, however, remained the same kind but determined, carrying a weight of purpose Jake had sensed even through his previous disguise. "Mrs. Thompson," Walter said softly, "my name is Walter Blackwood. I'm the former federal prosecutor who once tried to build a case against Richard Harrison. More importantly, I was your husband's best friend in law school, before life took us in different directions." Susan swayed, her face draining of color. Jake caught his mother's arm, helping her to a chair as Walter continued, his voice gentle but firm. "I've spent the last 5 years investigating Harrison's real estate empire, gathering evidence, following the trail of destroyed lives. Your husband's death was what started my investigation, but it wasn't the end." He opened his briefcase, pulling out folders thick with documents. "Harrison's pattern is always the same. He identifies properties he wants, arranges accidents or financial crises for the owners, then swoops in to buy at fraction of their worth. Your husband discovered this scheme just before his death. The brake lines on his car didn't fail by accident." The truth hit Jake like a physical blow. His father's death, their lost home, years of poverty, all orchestrated by Harrison. He remembered Bradley's taunt about the brakes, the cruel smile on Mr. Harrison's face in the principal's office. His hands clenched into fists as anger warred with shock. "Why," Susan whispered, her voice breaking, "why tell us this now? Why the disguise?" Walter's expression softened, "Because I needed to understand who Jake had become. David always said his son had his heart, that same instinct to help others even at personal cost. When I saw Jake give away his last piece of bread, not knowing who I was, I knew he was right." He turned to Jake, his eyes full of pride and sadness. "Your father would be so proud of you, son. That simple act of kindness proved you inherited his character, his moral compass. It also gave me the final piece I needed, proof that Harrison is still using the same tactics, still destroying families for profit." From his briefcase, Walter produced more documents, bank statements, property records, and most damning of all, maintenance logs showing deliberate sabotage of heating systems and other utilities. "Harrison's gotten bolder, sloppier. He didn't realize I've had investigators documenting everything, building a case that will bring down his entire operation." Anna's cough interrupted the moment, a harsh reminder of their immediate crisis. Walter's face hardened with resolve. "But legal justice takes time, and you need help now. That's why I'm here, not just as an investigator, but as your father's friend, offering the help I should have given years ago." He placed a check on the table, enough to cover 6 months' rent and utilities. "This isn't charity," he said firmly, seeing the protest forming on Susan's lips. Consider it an advance on the settlement Harrison will be paying once justice is served. More importantly, it's what David would have wanted me to do for his family." Susan's hands shook as she picked up the check, tears flowing freely now. "David never mentioned you," she said softly. "He protected everyone's privacy, even his best friends." Walter smiled sadly. He was the best of us, too good for the corporate law world we entered. While I chose high-profile cases and Harrison chose wealth at any cost, David chose to help people who needed it most. His death pushed me to remember why I became a lawyer in the first place. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the Thompson apartment, hope began to warm the cold air. Their immediate crisis might be averted, but bigger changes were coming, changes that would shake the foundations of Harrison's empire and bring long-delayed justice to countless families. Jake looked at Walter, seeing his father's friend beneath the powerful lawyer's exterior, understanding now why those eyes had seemed so familiar. "What happens next?" he asked, his voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. Walter's answer carried the weight of promised justice. "Next, we make Harrison answer for everything: your father, your home, every family he's hurt. But first, we need to get your heating fixed and make sure Anna sees a doctor. Together, we're going to right some very old wrongs." News of Walter Blackwood's involvement with the Thompson family spread through the community like wildfire. The sight of his sleek black car parked outside their building sparked intense speculation. For some neighbors, the presence of such obvious wealth brought out long-buried resentments and suspicions. The first signs of change came swiftly. A professional heating company arrived the next day, replacing their ancient system with a modern unit. Anna's prescription was filled at the pharmacy, where previously they'd been turned away for lack of funds. New windows were installed, properly sealed against the winter cold, and for the first time in years their apartment felt truly warm. But with these improvements came whispers. Mrs. Davis from apartment 3 billion, who had always shared her leftover casseroles with the Thompsons, now watched them with narrowed eyes. Suddenly they have money for new windows when they claimed they couldn't pay rent. She muttered to other neighbors. Something's not right there. At school, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Students who had ignored Jake now sought his attention, their sudden friendship transparent and hollow. Bradley Harrison's crowd spread vicious rumors, tales of Susan Thompson entertaining wealthy men, of Jake involved in drug dealing, of Anna being used for sympathy in some elaborate scam. Mark remained steadfast, defending Jake against the gossip, but even he seemed somewhat overwhelmed by the changes. "They're just jealous," he assured Jake during lunch. "But you could tell me if something big was happening, right? We're still friends." The school administration's behavior underwent a remarkable transformation. The principal, who had so recently threatened Jake with expulsion, now stopped him in the hallway with an oily smile. "We're so pleased to see things improving for your family," he said, his eyes darting to the window where Walter's car waited. "Perhaps we should discuss your suspension. Surely there's no need for such harsh measures." Susan faced her own challenges at work. Her supervisor at the diner suddenly found fault with everything she did. "Guess you think you're too good for this job now," he sneered, cutting her hours without explanation. Her cleaning clients began cancelling, citing mysterious complaints, though she suspected Harrison's influence. The building's other residents, many facing similar struggles with Harrison, were divided in their reactions. Some saw hope in the Thompson situation, whispering questions about whether Walter might help them too. Others, worn down by years of hardship, viewed their good fortune with suspicion and resentment. Walter had warned them this might happen. "People are quick to judge what they don't understand," he'd said. "Harrison will use this, try to turn the community against you. It's part of his pattern: isolate, then destroy." His words proved prophetic when graffiti appeared on their apartment door one morning, frauds spelled out in angry red letters. Jake scrubbed it off before his mother could see, his hands shaking with anger and hurt. That afternoon he found his locker at school vandalized, his books soaked with water, pages torn. The final blow came during a parent-teacher conference. Susan arrived to find Bradley Harrison's mother holding court among other parents, her voice carrying deliberately. "I heard she's involved with some rich lawyer. After her husband's convenient accident, of course. Makes you wonder what really happened there." Susan walked out, tears streaming down her face, to find Jake waiting. He'd skipped his last class, worried about exactly this scenario. Mommy started, but she shook her head. "I can handle gossip," she said firmly. "What I can't handle is them suggesting your father. That I would ever." Her voice broke. That evening, Walter visited again, his face grave as they recounted the community's reaction. "This is why Harrison has stayed in power so long," he explained. "He exploits people's tendency to turn on each other in hard times. But we're going to change that narrative." He outlined his plan, a community meeting at the local church, where he would explain the legal case against Harrison, invite other victims to come forward, and begin building a united front against the corruption that had plagued their neighborhood for years. "But more importantly," he added, looking at Jake, "we need to show them who you really are. The same boy who would give his last piece of bread to a stranger. That kind of character speaks louder than any rumors." Jake thought about this, remembering his father's words about standing tall when others tried to knock you down. "What can I do?" he asked. Walter smiled, the same smile Jake remembered from their first meeting. "Continue being exactly who you are. Keep helping others, even when they don't deserve it. Sometimes the best revenge is showing people the truth through your actions." As they discussed plans for the community meeting, none of them noticed the shadow that passed their window. Bradley Harrison, phone in hand, recording everything he could hear. His father would be very interested in this development, and the Harrisons had their own plans for the upcoming meeting. The stage was set for a confrontation that would either unite the community or tear it apart completely. For the Thompsons, everything hung in the balance: their reputation, their place in the community, and their chance at justice. Harrison's response to Walter Blackwood's interference was swift and devastating. Within days of learning about the planned community meeting, he launched a calculated campaign to destroy the Thompson family's credibility and isolate them completely from their support system. The first strike came through the local newspaper. A front-page article appeared, heavily implying that Susan Thompson had been involved in financial irregularities at her previous accounting job. The story was completely fabricated, but the damage was immediate. Her remaining cleaning clients cancelled, citing the need to protect their reputations. The diner fired her outright, the manager apologetically mentioning liability concerns. Next came the systematic harassment. Building maintenance workers began appearing at odd hours, insisting on emergency inspections that left their apartment in disarray. Anonymous calls to child services suggested Anna was being neglected, triggering invasive investigations that left the little girl terrified of strangers in suits. Bradley Harrison took the psychological warfare to school, armed with the recording from outside their window. Edited clips of Walter's visit, stripped of context, made it sound like the Thompsons were involved in a conspiracy to defraud local businesses. The whispers turned to open hostility. Jake found notes in his locker calling him a liar and a thief. Even Mark began to distance himself, confused and hurt by what seemed like evidence of deception. The community meeting, scheduled at First Baptist Church, faced unexpected obstacles. The church administrator called to cancel, citing plumbing emergencies that mysteriously appeared the day before. When Walter secured an alternate venue at the community center, anonymous complaints about code violations led to a last-minute shutdown. Harrison's masterstroke came in the form of a press conference on the steps of his downtown office. Flanked by local politicians and business leaders, he announced a community protection initiative aimed at preserving neighborhood integrity. His words were carefully chosen, painting himself as a defender against unnamed criminal elements threatening property values. "We must stand together against those who would exploit our community's generosity," Harrison declared, his expression a perfect mask of concern. "Those who cry poverty while secretly consorting with wealthy outsiders, those who claim victimhood while planning legal attacks against honest business owners. The message was clear to everyone who heard it. The Thompsons were being painted as manipulative frauds, and anyone who stood with them would face similar accusations. Former neighbors who had initially shown interest in speaking out about Harrison's abuses now hurried past their door, avoiding eye contact. Even Walter seemed temporarily stymied by the intensity of Harrison's counterattack. He's pulling out all the stops he admitted during a late-night strategy session. He must be more worried about our evidence than I thought. The pressure reached its peak when Jake arrived at school to find his art project for the upcoming exhibition destroyed. The carefully crafted sculpture, which depicted a community rising together against oppression, lay in pieces. Pinned to the wreckage was a note in Bradley's handwriting: "Frauds don't deserve to make art about justice." That afternoon, Bradley cornered Jake in the empty art room. "Dad says your father was asking too many questions before his accident," he taunted. "Says sometimes people need to learn when to keep their mouths shut. Maybe you should learn that lesson before something happens to your mom or that bratty sister." For the first time, Jake saw the true face of evil, not in Bradley's sneer, but in the casual way he threatened a family already haunted by one suspicious death. The realization that Harrison might have actually murdered his father, might still hurt his family, hit him with physical force. When Jake returned home, he found his mother sitting in the dark, holding Anna as she coughed. The heat was out again, despite the new system. The maintenance worker had claimed there was nothing wrong with it, even as their apartment grew colder. "Maybe we should just leave," Susan whispered, her voice hollow. "Start somewhere new. Your father would understand." Jake looked at his mother's defeated expression, at Anna's pale face, at the shadows threatening to swallow their hopes once again. Something inside him hardened into resolve. His father hadn't backed down when he discovered Harrison's crimes, and Jake wouldn't back down now. He picked up the phone and called Walter. "I want to tell my father's story," he said firmly. "At school, at the mall, anywhere people will listen. Harrison wins by making people afraid to speak up. So let's give them something worth speaking up about." Walter's voice carried a mix of pride and concern. "It's dangerous, Jake. Harrison's already shown what he's willing to do." "I know," Jake replied, watching his mother cradle Anna. "But Dad died trying to expose the truth. We owe it to him, and to every other family Harrison has hurt, to finish what he started." The decision was made. The Thompsons would stop reacting to Harrison's attacks and start fighting back. But as Jake hung up the phone, Bradley's threat echoed in his mind. The war for truth was about to become a battle for survival. The morning after Jake's decision to fight back, Harrison unleashed his most devastating attack yet. Police cars arrived at their apartment at dawn, lights flashing. Officers produced a warrant, citing anonymous tips about stolen property and fraud. They turned the small apartment upside down while neighbors watched from their doorways, whispering and recording with their phones. The officers found exactly what they were meant to find: an envelope of cash and jewelry planted during one of the maintenance inspections. Susan stood in shocked silence as they photographed the evidence, her face ashen as she recognized items recently reported stolen from wealthy homes she had cleaned. "Mrs. Thompson, you'll need to come with us," one officer said, his face professionally neutral. Jake watched in horror as they led his mother away in handcuffs, her only words a desperate plea: "Jake, take care of Anna. Call Walter." The scene played out exactly as Harrison had orchestrated. Channel 5 News arrived just in time to capture Susan's arrest, their report carefully crafted to imply her guilt. "Local cleaning lady accused of systematic theft from clients' homes," the headline read. "Sources suggest possible connection to organized crime." Social services arrived within hours. The caseworker, though sympathetic, was bound by protocol. "Without an approved guardian present, we'll need to place Anna in temporary care," she explained gently. Jake clung to his sister, who sobbed uncontrollably, her cough worsening with each heart-wrenching cry. Walter arrived just as they were preparing to take Anna. His legal credentials and quick thinking secured temporary guardianship, allowing both children to remain in the apartment under his supervision. But the damage to their reputation was complete. At school, Jake faced a gauntlet of cruel taunts and open hostility. Bradley Harrison held court by the lockers, loudly discussing how his father had always known the Thompsons were criminals teachers who had once shown sympathy, now avoided eye contact. His art teacher, M.S. Martinez, was the only one who still treated him normally, quietly slipping him an encouraging note: truth always finds its way to light. Mark finally confronted Jake during lunch, his face troubled. "Why didn't you tell me what was really going on? My mom works in one of those houses. She could have lost her job if anyone thought she was connected to you guys." "It's not true," Jake protested. "Harrison planted that evidence. He's trying to stop us from exposing what he did to my dad." But Mark just shook his head. "I want to believe you, Jake. But everything looks really bad. Maybe we should take a break from hanging out for a while." The isolation grew more profound each day. Their neighbors posted a petition demanding their eviction. The local grocery store clerk watched them suspiciously, checking every item against their receipt. Anna's teacher suggested she might be happier at another school. Walter worked tirelessly on Sue's case, but Harrison's influence ran deep. Evidence disappeared from police lockup. Witnesses changed their statements. The judge assigned to the case had received generous donations from Harrison Properties for his re-election campaign. Jake spent his evenings caring for Anna, trying to maintain some normalcy while their mother sat in jail. He helped with her homework, made simple meals from their dwindling supplies, and held her through nightmares. During the day, he collected evidence of his own recording conversations, photographing documents, building a record of Harrison's systematic destruction of their lives. The final blow came when someone spray-painted thieves across their apartment door in bright red letters. Anna burst into tears at the sight, but Jake just grabbed a bucket and started scrubbing. As he worked, elderly Mrs. Chen from next door quietly joined him, bringing her own cleaning supplies. "I remember your father," she said softly, scrubbing alongside him. "He helped me when Harrison tried to evict me 5 years ago. He was a good man. Like father, like son." She pressed a container of homemade dumplings into his hands before hurrying away. That small act of kindness sparked something in Jake. If one neighbor remembered his father's help, others might too. That night he began writing not just about the current accusations, but about everything. His father's discovery of Harrison's schemes, the suspicious accident, the years of harassment, and the systematic destruction of families who dared to stand up to the corrupt developer. He published his story on social media, shared it in community forums, printed copies and distributed them throughout the neighborhood. Harrison's lawyers immediately demanded its removal, threatening legal action, but Jake kept writing. Each threat simply became part of the ongoing narrative. Walter, watching Jake's determined campaign, finally shared a crucial piece of information. "Your father kept records, Jake. Documentation of everything he discovered about Harrison. I've been searching for years, but never found where he hid them." Jake stared at the teddy bear on Anna's bed, their father's last gift. Something clicked in his memory. The bear had always been unusually heavy, its stitching a bit too neat. With trembling hands, he reached for the seam hidden under the bear's arm. Inside, he found a small USB drive, carefully wrapped in plastic. His father's final evidence, waiting all this time to be discovered. But as Jake moved to connect it to his laptop, lights flooded the apartment windows. Outside, Harrison's security team had surrounded the building. The war for truth was about to enter its most dangerous phase. In the county jail, Susan Thompson's world had shrunk to a 6x8 cell and endless hours of worry about her children. The public defender assigned to her case seemed more interested in negotiating a plea deal than proving her innocence. "Oh, with the evidence they have," he explained wearily, "we're looking at 3 to 5 years minimum. A guilty plea might get it down to 18 months. The evidence against her mounted daily. More stolen items discovered in storage units rented in her name. Bank accounts she'd never seen showing suspicious deposits. Former clients came forward with new accusations, their stories seemingly coordinated for maximum impact. Each new charge pushed the possibility of bail further out of reach. Her one lifeline was Walter's weekly visits, bringing news of Jake and Anna. But even these updates brought fresh pain. Anna's cough had developed into pneumonia, requiring hospitalization. The insurance claim was denied another of Harrison's machinations. But Jake was losing weight, trying to stretch their dwindling resources while maintaining his campaign to expose the truth. The breaking point came when Susan received notice that she'd been fired from her last remaining job, the night cleaning position at a local office building. With no income and mounting legal fees, the threat of homelessness loomed over her children despite Walter's help. The thought of Jake and Anna living in their car, like so many other families Harrison had destroyed, kept her awake at night. During one particularly dark night, a guard delivered an unexpected message Richard Harrison wanted to meet. He arrived the next morning immaculate in his designer suit, his smile cold as he sat across from Susan in the visiting room. "Mrs. Thompson," he began smoothly, "this unfortunate situation could end today. Simply sign a confession, admit to the thefts, and drop all allegations about my business practices. In return, I'll ensure your children are taken care of." The threat in his words was clear. Susan's hands clenched under the table. "Taken care of like my husband was." Harrison's smile didn't waver. "Accidents happen to nosy people, Mrs. Thompson. David couldn't leave well enough alone. Jake seems to have inherited that unfortunate trait. It would be a shame if he met with a similar accident while walking to school." Susan felt the blood drain from her face. "You're threatening a child." "I'm offering you a choice," Harrison corrected. "Protect your children by confessing, or watch them suffer the consequences of your stubbornness. The same choice I offered David before his accident. He chose." The revelation hit Susan like a physical blow. Her husband had died trying to protect them. Now she faced the same impossible choice. Harrison placed a document on the table, a full confession, already prepared. "Think about Anna's cough," he added softly. "Pneumonia can be so dangerous in young children, especially when they can't afford proper medical care." Susan stared at the paper, her vision blurring with tears. Everything they'd built, every sacrifice they'd made, had led to this moment. Her signature would destroy their reputation forever, but might keep her children alive. As she reached for the pen, Harrison's smile widened. "I knew you'd be reasonable. Unlike your son, with his foolish campaign for justice. This will discredit everything he's claimed." Susan's hand froze above the paper. Jake's voice echoed in her memory. "Reading his latest blog post over the phone, we stopped being victims the moment we stopped being afraid." She thought of David, of his refusal to be silenced, of the evidence he'd hidden away. Looking directly into Harrison's eyes, she tore the confession in half. "My husband died fighting you. My son risks everything to expose you. I won't betray either of them." Harrison's facade cracked, showing the rage beneath. "Then you've sentenced them to suffer. By the time I'm done, no one in this town will help your family. Jake's evidence will disappear. Anna's medical care will mysteriously fail, and you'll watch it all happen from behind bars." He stood, straightening his tie. "Remember this moment, Mrs. Thompson. Remember that you chose this." After he left, Susan broke down, her sobs echoing off the cell walls. She had just chosen principles over her children's safety. But as her tears dried, determination replaced despair. Harrison had revealed too much in his arrogance. His threats against Jake, his admission about David's death, all recorded by the visiting room cameras. She requested paper and a pen, beginning a detailed account of Harrison's visit. If he was going to destroy her family, she would ensure there was a record. Every threat, every admission would be documented. She couldn't protect her children directly, but she could add her voice to Jake's growing chorus of truth. At night, in her cell, Susan whispered a prayer for her family's safety and a promise to her late husband. They would not be silenced. They would not be broken. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. Anna's condition deteriorated rapidly in the county hospital's crowded pediatric ward. The pneumonia resisted initial treatments, her small body racked by coughing fits that left her gasping for air. But Jake spent every possible moment by her bedside, watching helplessly as his sister fought for each breath. The hospital staff seemed strangely reluctant to provide more than basic care. Tests were delayed, specialists were mysteriously unavailable, and prescribed medications were frequently out of stock. Jake overheard a nurse mentioning pressure from the hospital board to minimize resources allocated to certain patients. Walter worked frantically to combat Harrison's influence, but the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The hospital's main wing bore the Harrison family name, a result of generous donations that bought control over medical decisions. Even doctors who wanted to help were constrained by administrative roadblocks. "Your sister needs specialized treatment," Dr. Sarah Reynolds whispered to Jake during a quiet moment. "But every request I submit gets denied. Someone's blocking everything I try to do." She slipped him a prescription, adding, "I know a pharmacy that might help," off the record. The medication would cost more than they had. Jake started selling everything of value, from their apartment, his father's old books, his mother's jewelry box, even his own winter coat. Each sale brought in only a fraction of what they needed, but Anna's worsening condition drove him to desperate measures. Meanwhile, the USB drive from the teddy bear revealed the devastating scope of Harrison's crimes. David Thompson had documented everything: forged documents, manipulated accident reports, bribes paid to officials, and a complex network of shell companies used to hide illegal activities. But without access to secure computers or legal help, Jake couldn't risk uploading the files. Harrison's tech team would trace it immediately. Bradley Harrison chose this moment to strike another blow. He cornered Jake in the hospital parking lot, flanked by his usual followers. "Dad says to give him the drive," he sneered. "Or maybe Anna's oxygen levels might drop tonight. Machines malfunction all the time." For the first time, Jake saw real evil in Bradley's eyes, the same cold calculation he'd seen in Mr. Harrison. The threat against Anna wasn't just bullying, it was a genuine warning. The Harrison family would stop at nothing to protect their empire. That night, Anna's fever spiked dangerously high. The night nurse, unfamiliar with her case, seemed indifferent to Jake's pleas for help. Through the haze of fever, Anna clutched her brother's hand. "I want Mom," she whimpered. "Why can't Mom come?" Jake held his sister, feeling the heat radiating from her small body, watching the inadequate medication drip slowly through her IV. He thought of his mother in jail, of his father's hidden evidence, of Harrison's seemingly untouchable power. Something had to break. In the early hours of morning, Mrs. Chen appeared at the hospital room door, carrying containers of homemade soup and fresh fruit. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood Mark, shifting uncomfortably but holding bags of supplies. "My mum read your blog," he said quietly. "She remembers when your dad helped our family with legal papers. We believe you." More visitors arrived throughout the day. Former clients of David Thompson, neighbors who remembered his kindness, even a few of Harrison's former victims who'd rebuilt their lives elsewhere. Each brought what they could: food, clothes, small amounts of money, and most importantly, their stories. Jake recorded everything, building a comprehensive record of Harrison's decades-long campaign of destruction. But with each new story, his anger grew. How many families had been broken? How many lives destroyed? The evidence on the USB drive could end it all, but using it might sign Anna's death warrant. Walter arrived that evening, his face grave. "Harrison's making his move," he reported. "He's filed for immediate eviction, claiming criminal activity voids your lease. He's also pushing the hospital board to transfer Anna to a more appropriate facility, a substandard clinic outside the city." Jake looked at his sleeping sister, her breathing still labored but slightly stronger after Dr. Reynolds's hidden intervention. The medication was helping, but they needed more. Everything hinged on exposing Harrison before he could silence them completely. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. "The eviction hearing is in 2 days. The hospital board meets tomorrow." Walter hesitated. "Jake, we might have to consider getting you and Anna out of town. I have friends who could hide you until—" "No," Jake interrupted, his voice firm. "Dad didn't run. Mom didn't break. We're going to fight." He pulled out the USB drive, weighing it in his hand. "Harrison wants this. Let's give it to him, but not the way he expects." As Jake outlined his plan, neither he nor Walter noticed Bradley Harrison watching from the hallway, phone in hand, recording everything. The final confrontation was approaching, and only one side would survive with their truth intact. The eviction hearing fell on the coldest morning of the year. Jake stood before Judge William Carson, his father's USB drive burning a hole in his pocket, while Harrison's lawyers presented their case with practiced precision. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal teams, but with dozens of community members who had responded to Jake's blog. "Your Honor," Harrison's lead attorney began, "the Thompson family's criminal activities clearly violate Section 8 of their lease agreement. With Mrs. Thompson in custody awaiting trial for theft and mounting evidence of ongoing fraudulent behavior, we seek immediate possession of the property." The evidence seemed overwhelming: photographs of the planted stolen items, bank statements showing suspicious transactions, even surveillance footage carefully edited to suggest illegal activities. Jake watched the judge's expression grow increasingly stern, knowing their entire plan hinged on the next few moments. Walter stood to object, but before he could speak, the courtroom doors burst open. Susan Thompson entered, escorted by her prison guards, her presence unexpected but commanding. Behind her came Dr. Reynolds, clutching medical records, and most surprisingly Mrs. Harrison herself, Bradley's mother, her face set with grim determination. "Your Honor," Walter addressed the court, "we have evidence that will not only exonerate the Thompson family, but expose a pattern of criminal behavior by Harrison Properties that extends back over a decade, including the orchestrated death of David Thompson." Richard Harrison's face remained impassive, but Jake caught the slight tightening of his jaw. Bradley, sitting behind his father, shifted nervously, his phone clutched in his hands. The judge, noting the unusual assembly of witnesses, leaned forward with interest. "Before we proceed," Harrison interrupted smoothly, "I should mention that young Anna Thompson's condition has taken a turn for the worse. Perhaps we should delay these proceedings so her brother can attend to her." The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. Jake felt his heart stop. He glanced at his phone, no messages from the hospital. Was Harrison bluffing? Or had something really happened to Anna? The moment of doubt nearly broke his resolve, but then he saw his mother's face. Susan gave him a slight nod, her eyes filled with the same strength that had made her tear up Harrison's confession. "Your Honor," Jake spoke up, his voice stronger than he felt, "Mr. Harrison just demonstrated exactly how he operates through threats and fear. But today we're not afraid anymore." He pulled out the USB drive, along with a stack of printed documents. "This evidence was collected by my father before his death. It shows how Harrison Properties arranges accidents for homeowners who won't sell, how they forge documents, bribe officials, and destroy families who stand in their way." Harrison's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. These unsubstantiated claims are supported by testimony I'm prepared to give." Mrs. Harrison interrupted, stepping forward. The courtroom gasped. Richard Harrison turned to stare at his wife, genuine shock breaking through his composed facade. "Margaret, what are you doing?" he hissed. "What I should have done years ago," she replied clearly. "I'm telling the truth about David Thompson's death, about all the families you've destroyed, about everything." Bradley stood up, his face red. "Mom, you can't." "Sit down, Bradley," she snapped. "I've watched you become just like your father, hurting people without conscience. It ends today." Judge Carson banged his gavel for order as the courtroom erupted in chaos. "Mr. Blackwood, are you prepared to present this evidence?" Walter stepped forward with a laptop. "Your Honor, we have documented proof of over 30 cases of fraud, orchestrated accidents, and wrongful evictions. We also have Mrs. Harrison's sworn statement about David Thompson's murder and testimony from hospital staff about recent attempts to deny medical care to Anna Thompson as leverage." The judge's face darkened as he reviewed the initial documents. "Mr. Harrison, do you have any response to these allegations?" Harrison stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, these are clearly fabricated." "That's a lie," a new voice rang out. Everyone turned to see Bradley Harrison standing, his phone held out. "I have recordings. Dad threatening the Thompsons, ordering Anna's care blocked, everything. I recorded it all." His father's face contorted with rage. "Bradley, shut your mouth." "No, Dad. I watched you try to kill a little girl to protect your secrets." "I'm done." Bradley walked forward, holding out his phone to the judge. "Everything's here, including what really happened to Mr. Thompson." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Carson reviewed the recordings. Finally, he looked up, his expression thunderous. "Bailiff, take Mr. Harrison into custody. Mrs. Thompson, you are released to the custody of Mr. Blackwood pending review of your case. And someone get the district attorney in here immediately." As the bailiff approached, Harrison made one last desperate move. "If I go down, everyone goes down. Every judge I've bribed, every official I bought." "That's enough." The judge's gavel crack echoed like a gunshot. "Mr. Harrison, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." Jake watched as Harrison was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. But his victory felt hollow as he checked his phone again, worried about Anna. That's when he saw the message from Dr. Reynolds' new treatment approved. "Anna's responding well. She's asking for you." The war wasn't over. There would be trials, testimonies, and challenges ahead. But in that moment, watching his mother walk free and Harrison face justice, Jake felt his father's presence. They had done it. The truth had finally come to light. Just as victory seemed within reach in the courtroom, Jake's phone lit up with an urgent message from the hospital. Anna's condition had deteriorated drastically. Despite Harrison's arrest, his influence still poisoned the hospital administration. Orders had been given to transfer her to an ill-equipped facility on the outskirts of town, a final act of vengeance from a falling titan. Dr. Reynolds was fighting the transfer order, but hospital security was already preparing to move Anna. "They're claiming it's a capacity issue," she explained breathlessly when Jake and Susan arrived. "But they're moving her to a facility that doesn't even have proper respiratory equipment. In her condition, it could be fatal." Anna lay pale and still in her hospital bed, oxygen mask fogging with each labored breath. The pneumonia had spread to both lungs and her fever burned dangerously high. Susan, seeing her daughter for the first time since her arrest, broke down at the bedside. "My baby," she whispered, touching Anna's burning forehead. "What have they done to you?" Hospital security arrived, accompanied by an administrator with transfer papers. "This isn't a request," the administrator stated coldly. "The board's decision is final. Either she goes voluntarily, or we'll be forced to remove her." Walter rushed in with a court order, but the administrator merely glanced at it and smiled. "This order's jurisdiction doesn't cover internal hospital policies. We have complete discretion over patient transfers." But Jake watched his sister's oxygen levels dropping on the monitor, each number bringing them closer to disaster. The security guards moved toward the bed, their faces impassive. Susan stood her ground, placing herself between them and Anna. "You'll have to go through me first." The tension broke with the arrival of Mrs. Harrison, still in her courtroom clothes. "Stop this immediately," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of decades as a hospital board member's wife. "My husband's orders are void. He's in custody, and I'm invoking my power of attorney over all Harrison family interests." The administrator faltered. "Mrs. Harrison, the board's decision." "The board acted under coercion," she interrupted, "and unless everyone in this room wants to face criminal charges for attempted murder, Anna Thompson will receive the best care this hospital can provide." The security guards backed away, but Anna's condition continued to worsen. Her oxygen levels plummeted despite the maximum flow through her mask. Dr. Reynolds worked frantically, ordering emergency treatments and medications that had previously been unavailable. "She needs to be intubated," Dr. Reynolds announced grimly. "Her lungs can't keep up anymore." She turned to Susan. "There are risks, but without it." Susan squeezed Jake's hand, both of them watching Anna fight for each breath. "Do it," Susan whispered. "Save my baby." The next hours were the longest of Jake's life. He sat with his mother, watching the ventilator force air into Anna's small body, listening to the steady beep of monitors. Mrs. Harrison remained with them, using her influence to ensure Anna received every possible treatment. "I should have stopped Richard years ago," she confessed quietly. "After David, I told myself I was protecting Bradley, but I was really just protecting myself. Watching him threaten Anna, seeing her suffer like this, it finally made me understand what true courage looks like." Throughout the night, members of the community arrived with food, blankets, and support. Mark and his mother brought supplies and stayed to help. Mrs. Chen came with healing soups and prayers. Even some of the hospital staff who had been afraid to help before now stopped by with extra care and attention. Dawn broke with a tentative ray of hope. Anna's fever began to drop, her oxygen levels stabilizing. Dr. Reynolds, exhausted but smiling, delivered the news they'd been desperate to hear: she's fighting back. The new medications are working. Jake stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of promise. Behind him, his mother dozed in a chair by Anna's bed, her hand never leaving her daughter's. The ventilator's rhythm had become a song of survival, each breath a note of defiance against those who had tried to silence them. Mrs. Harrison approached, looking years older than she had in court. "The board is meeting this morning. I'm going to make sure everyone involved in denying Anna's care faces consequences. It's time this hospital remembered its true purpose." Jake nodded, too emotionally drained for words. The victory in court meant nothing if Anna didn't survive. But as he watched his sister's chest rise and fall with growing strength, he saw something his father had died protecting: the power of truth to overcome corruption, of love to defeat hate. The sun climbed higher, warming the cold hospital room. Anna's monitors showed steadily improving numbers, each one a small victory in their larger war for justice. They had won the battle against Harrison, but the fight to heal both Anna's body and their community's soul was just beginning. Even from his jail cell, Richard Harrison orchestrated one final assault on the Thompson family. His network of corrupted officials and business associates launched a coordinated attack on multiple fronts, determined to destroy the family before the full evidence could be presented in court. Tax auditors suddenly discovered irregularities in Susan's past returns. Child Protective Services received multiple anonymous calls about Anna's care. The local press began running stories questioning Walter's motives and suggesting a conspiracy. Bank accounts were frozen, credit cards cancelled, and old debts mysteriously resurfaced. But the most dangerous threat came from Harrison's hidden partners, wealthy individuals who had profited from his schemes for years. They sent representatives to the hospital with offers that masked deadly ultimatums: drop all charges, surrender the evidence, and sign non-disclosure agreements or face severe consequences. Jake found one such visitor in Anna's room late one night, a smooth-talking lawyer in an expensive suit. "Think about your sister's future," the man suggested, placing a check with many zeros on the bedside table. "One signature, and all your problems disappear." Before Jake could respond, Bradley Harrison stepped into the room. His presence shocked everyone. He hadn't been seen since testifying against his father. "Get out," Bradley told the lawyer, his voice hard. "And tell your clients that if anything happens to the Thompsons, I'll release everything I know about their involvement." The lawyer retreated, but the incident sparked a realization. Jake turned to Bradley. "They're not just trying to save your dad, they're protecting themselves." Bradley nodded grimly. The USB drive exposed their whole network. Dad's just the tip of the iceberg. That's why they're desperate and dangerous. As if confirming their fears, Walter called with alarming news. The judge who had ordered Harrison's arrest had been involved in a suspicious car accident. Key witnesses were withdrawing their statements. Evidence was vanishing from police custody. Susan gathered everyone in Anna's hospital room: Jake, Bradley, Walter, Mrs. Harrison, and their core supporters. "They're trying to isolate us again," she observed, "make us feel powerless and alone." "Not this time," Jake declared. He opened his laptop, showing them his blog's traffic statistics. Thousands of people were sharing their story. Other victims of Harrison's schemes were coming forward. Local news stations from neighboring cities were picking up the story, beyond the reach of Harrison's influence. Bradley added his own revelation: "I've been gathering data since I first started recording Dad. Names, dates, transactions, everything's backed up on secure servers. They can't bury this anymore." Mrs. Harrison, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Richard's partners are meeting tonight at the country club. They think they're safe there, beyond public scrutiny. But I'm still a member." She held up her access card with a grim smile. The plan came together quickly. While Mrs. Harrison got them into the club, Bradley and Jake would handle the technology. Walter prepared legal documents, and Susan coordinated with trusted reporters. Even Anna contributed, insisting on recording a video from her hospital bed about her treatment. That night, as the city's most powerful people gathered to plan the Thompsons' destruction, their own secrets were being broadcast on every screen in the country club. Financial records, emails, recorded conversations, the evidence of decades of corruption played in an endless loop. Panic erupted as phones began ringing with calls from lawyers, family members, and reporters. Police cars arrived, having received anonymous tips about criminal conspiracies. Federal agents appeared with warrants, their investigation sparked by the suddenly public evidence. In the chaos, Richard Harrison's closest partner, a prominent bank president, confronted Jake. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. "We built this city. We control everything." Jake stood his ground, thinking of his father's courage, his mother's resilience, and Anna's fighting spirit. "Not anymore," he replied. "The truth controls everything now." The night ended with more arrests, resignations, and hurried confessions as Harrison's network imploded. Those who had thought themselves untouchable discovered that money couldn't shield them from justice when the whole world was watching. In Anna's hospital room, Susan held her daughter while they watched the news coverage. The reporter was standing outside the country club, describing the largest corruption scandal in the city's history. Behind her, prestigious figures were being led away in handcuffs. "Dad would be proud," Jake said softly, watching justice unfold. Susan squeezed his hand. "He is proud, Jake. Somewhere he's watching and smiling." Anna, stronger now but still on oxygen, pointed at the TV where Bradley was being interviewed. "He helped us," she said wonderingly, "even though it was his dad." "He chose truth over family loyalty," Jake explained. "Just like his mom did. Sometimes the bravest thing is standing up to the people closest to you." As the city's power structure crumbled on live television, the Thompsons held each other close. They had lost so much, but in fighting back, they had gained something precious: their dignity, their truth, and a justice that would help countless others. The corruption that had seemed invincible was finally exposed to the light, proving that even the most powerful empires could fall when confronted with the strength of one family's united stand for truth. Despite their apparent victory, the Thompsons soon discovered that Harrison's influence reached far beyond legal channels. The morning after the country club expose, they woke to find their world systematically shutting down around them. The hospital, though unable to transfer Anna, began limiting visitors under the guise of infection control protocols. Susan and Jake found themselves restricted to brief, supervised visits. Dr. Reynolds was suddenly reassigned to another ward, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic physician who seemed more interested in paperwork than patient care. At school, Jake faced a new level of isolation. Teachers who had witnessed the country club scandal now avoided eye contact, afraid of being associated with the controversy. His classmates, many from families implicated in Harrison's schemes, treated him like a pariah. Even Mark, who had stood by him earlier, became distant after his parents received threatening letters about their mortgage. "I'm sorry," Mark whispered during lunch, sitting alone with Jake in a corner of the cafeteria. "My dad could lose his job. The bank, they're calling in loans for anyone who talks to your family." He slid a note across the table, his last act of friendship, warning that more attacks were coming. The community turned against them with frightening speed. Local shops refused their business. Delivery services couldn't find their address. The internet service to their apartment became mysteriously unreliable, cutting off Jake's ability to update his blog and communicate with supporters. Mrs. Chen was evicted after being seen bringing food to the hospital. Other neighbors who had shown support found their lives similarly disrupted: job losses, loan recalls, tax audits. The message was clear: helping the Thompsons meant facing destruction. Bradley and his mother faced their own ostracism. Former friends crossed the street to avoid them. The Harrison name, once opening every door in the city, now brought whispers and turned backs. Mrs. Harrison's hospital board position was temporarily suspended pending review. Walter's law practice came under intense scrutiny. Anonymous complaints to the Bar Association. Clients pressured to seek other representation. Even his most loyal employees began receiving better offers from competing firms, coupled with warnings about staying. The isolation strategy reached its peak when Susan lost her visiting privileges entirely. A new hospital administrator cited security concerns after anonymous threats were reported. Jake arrived one morning to find armed guards outside Anna's room, denying access to anyone without special clearance. Through the window of Anna's room, Jake could see his sister's confusion and fear as strangers in medical garb moved around her. Her attempts to wave at him were met with closed curtains. The sight of her small hand reaching toward him before being hidden behind sterile white fabric nearly broke him. "They're trying to break us apart," Susan realized, standing in the hospital parking lot after another denied visit. "Make us feel alone, hopeless. It's what Harrison did to other families, isolate them until they gave up." Jake watched the sunset paint the hospital windows gold, knowing Anna was somewhere behind them, alone and scared. "But we're not other families," he said firmly, "and we're not alone, even if they make it feel that way." That night their apartment felt emptier than ever. The silence was broken only by Susan's muffled sobs from her bedroom, and the distant sound of police sirens, another constant presence since Harrison's arrest, their patrol cars monitoring the building with intimidating regularity. Jake sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills and denial letters from every aid organization in the city. Each rejection cited different reasons, but the pattern was clear: someone was making sure no help reached them through official channels. He opened his laptop, trying to update his blog, but the connection failed again. His phone had no signal. Even the landline gave only a dead tone. They were being digitally erased, cut off from the world as thoroughly as Anna was being isolated in her hospital room. In the darkness of their apartment, Jake thought about his father's courage, his mother's resilience, and his sister's fighting spirit. They had exposed the truth, but truth alone wasn't enough against a system designed to protect itself by destroying its challengers. As he finally lay down to sleep, Jake heard something hit his window. Cautiously pulling back the curtain, he found a rock wrapped in paper, not a threat, but a message from Mrs. Chen, written before her eviction: "Your father helped many. We remember. Stay strong." Help comes in unexpected ways. The note brought both comfort and pain. Their supporters were being punished, driven away, yet still found ways to reach out. But how long could anyone resist the systematic destruction of their lives? How long before survival meant surrendering to the very corruption they had fought to expose? The question echoed in the empty apartment, unanswered except by the steady rhythm of police sirens circling their building like sharks in the night. The weight of isolation and constant pressure finally broke Susan Thompson on a cold Tuesday morning. After another night of being denied access to Anna, of watching her daughter through hospital windows while guards kept her at a distance, something inside her shattered. She stood in their increasingly bare apartment, holding Anna's favorite stuffed bear, the one that had hidden David's evidence. Her hands trembled as she traced the restitched seam where Jake had found the USB drive. The walls seemed to close in around her, decorated with Anna's drawings that now felt like accusations of her failure as a mother. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "David, I'm not strong enough. I can't protect them like you could." Her words dissolved into deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Jake found her there hours later, still clutching the bear, her face vacant and tear-stained. The sight terrified him more than any of Harrison's threats. His mother had always been their rock, maintaining hope through every crisis. Now she looked broken, diminished, like a flower wilting in darkness. "Mom," his voice cracked as he knelt beside her. "Mom, please look at me." Susan's eyes, when they finally met his, were distant and unfocused. "I saw him today," she said softly. "Your father. He was standing outside Anna's window, shaking his head. So disappointed in me. I couldn't save our little girl." Jake's heart clenched. "Mom, Dad wasn't there. You're exhausted. You haven't slept properly in days." He tried to help her up, but she pulled away. "The guards," she continued, her voice taking on a frantic edge, "they're not hospital security. They're Harrison's men. They're going to take Anna, just like they took our home after David died. We're going to lose everything again." Her paranoia, though extreme, wasn't entirely unfounded. Jake had noticed the guards changing shifts with military precision, their eyes too alert, their stance too professional for typical hospital security. But seeing his mother spiral into despair was more frightening than any external threat. He called Walter, who arrived quickly with a doctor he trusted. The diagnosis was severe anxiety and exhaustion, complicated by post-traumatic stress from years of harassment and recent events. The doctor recommended immediate hospitalization, but Susan became hysterical at the suggestion. "They'll take Jake too," she cried, clutching her son's arm. "Harrison's people are everywhere. The hospital, the police, everyone. They're watching us, waiting. I won't let them take my boy." It took hours to calm her enough to accept medication. As she finally drifted into troubled sleep in her bedroom, Walter pulled Jake aside. "This is my fault," the lawyer admitted heavily. "I should have seen this coming." The isolation tactics, the psychological pressure, Harrison's people knew exactly how to break her. Jake stared at his mother's bedroom door, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. "What do we do now?" "She needs professional help," Walter said gently. "But he's right about one thing: we can't trust the local hospitals. I have contacts in a private facility upstate, doctors who can't be bought or threatened." The suggestion of sending his mother away, even for treatment, made Jake's chest tighten with panic. "I can't lose her too. Anna needs her. I need her." Jake Walter's voice was kind but firm. "Your mother's been fighting this battle for 5 years, since David died. She's carried the weight of protecting you and Anna, working multiple jobs, enduring Harrison's harassment. Everyone has a breaking point. Let us help her find her strength again." That night, Jake sat beside his sleeping mother, listening to her murmur David's name in her dreams. The strong woman who had held their family together through poverty and persecution now looked small and vulnerable, her face lined with exhaustion and fear. He thought about all the times she had gone hungry so he and Anna could eat, how she had worked through illness and exhaustion, how she had faced Harrison's threats with unwavering dignity. She had been their shield for so long, absorbing blows meant for her children until finally, inevitably, she cracked. Morning brought clarity and decision. Jake signed the papers Walter provided, authorizing his mother's transfer to the private facility. As they helped her into Walter's car, Susan clutched the teddy bear, still lost in her broken world, where David's ghost watched with disappointment and Harrison's shadows lurked around every corner. "I'll take care of everything," Jake promised her. "Just focus on getting better. Anna and I will be right here when you come home." Susan touched his face, a moment of lucidity breaking through her haze. "You're so like your father," she whispered. "So strong. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger for you." Watching the car drive away, Jake felt the full weight of his family's fate settling onto his 16-year-old shoulders. With his mother gone and Anna isolated in the hospital, he stood alone against the forces still working to destroy them. In the empty apartment, he picked up one of Anna's drawings that had fallen from the wall, a bright crayon picture of their family holding hands under a smiling sun. The paper was worn from being folded and carried in Susan's pocket, a talisman of hope she had clung to until hope itself became too heavy to bear. Left alone to manage the crisis, Jake faced the darkest hours of their struggle. Each morning brought new challenges: disconnected utilities despite Walter's payments, misplaced medical records delaying Anna's treatments, and increasingly hostile surveillance from unmarked cars outside their building. The hospital had further restricted Anna's visiting hours to just 30 minutes per day, always supervised. During one such visit, Jake found his sister pale and withdrawn, her eyes haunted by isolation. "Where's Mummy?" she asked repeatedly. "Why doesn't she come anymore?" Jake tried to explain about their mother's special doctor, but the words felt hollow. How could he tell his 8-year-old sister that their mother had broken under the strain of protecting them? Instead, he brought Anna's sketchbook and colored pencils, encouraging her to draw messages for their mom that he promised to deliver. At night, alone in their apartment, Jake fought his own battles with despair. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the single lamp he kept lit to ward off the darkness. He slept on the couch, unable to face the emptiness of his bedroom or his mother's vacant space. Bradley Harrison made an unexpected appearance one evening, slipping past the surveillance to bring news. "They're planning something big," he warned. "Dad's lawyers are filing motions to dismiss all charges, claiming mental instability invalidates Mom's testimony. They're going to use your mother's breakdown against you." The information felt like a physical blow. Jake had been documenting everything: the isolation tactics, the continued harassment, the systematic dismantling of their support system. But who would believe a teenager's word against a team of expensive lawyers arguing that the Thompsons were simply a troubled family imagining persecution? Desperate for help, Jake tried reaching out to local media, but Harrison's influence still controlled the narrative. One sympathetic reporter managed to send a message: all stories about the Thompsons were being killed by editors worried about advertising revenue and legal threats. Walter's resources were stretched thin, defending against the legal onslaught. Every piece of evidence they had gathered was being challenged, every witness pressured to recount. The lawyer looked increasingly haggard during his visits, though he tried to maintain an optimistic front for Jake's sake. The breaking point came when Jake received notice that Anna's medical insurance had been retroactively cancelled. The hospital administration presented him with a bill for hundreds of thousands of dollars, making it clear that continued care depended on immediate payment. In his desperation, Jake considered surrendering, signing whatever papers Harrison's lawyers demanded, retracting all accusations, accepting their version of David's death as an accident. If it meant saving Anna and bringing their mother home, wouldn't his father understand? That night, sorting through their remaining possessions for anything valuable enough to sell, Jake found his father's old journal hidden behind loose baseboards. The final entry dated the day before the accident. Read, "The truth matters more than fear. Whatever happens, I need my children to know that standing up to evil is always worth the cost." Those words, written in his father's firm hand, reignited something in Jake's spirit. He began working through the night, creating multiple copies of all their evidence, encrypting files, and establishing dead man switches that would release everything to the public if anything happened to him or his family. Using the last of their money, he bought a prepaid phone and began recording every interaction, photographing every document, building a real-time record of the continued harassment. If Harrison's people wanted to paint them as paranoid, he would show exactly what they were paranoid about. When Bradley visited again, Jake gave him a complete backup of everything. "If they come for us," he instructed, "release it all. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence Dad gathered. Make sure everyone knows the truth." Bradley nodded gravely, understanding the responsibility being placed in his hands. "They won't break you like they broke my father," he promised. "I won't let them." Alone again, Jake stood at the window watching Harrison's surveillance cars circle the block. He was 16, separated from his sister, his mother in treatment, his father's killers still walking free. But in his father's final words, he had found a strength that transcended their isolation. Tomorrow would bring new battles, more attempts to break their spirit and bury the truth. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of their diminished home, Jake made a decision. They could take everything else, but they couldn't take his father's legacy of courage. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Walter's tireless investigation had uncovered a disgruntled former Harrison Properties employee, Sarah Mitchell, who had maintained a secret archive of internal documents spanning 2 decades. As Harrison's personal assistant for 15 years, she had witnessed the steady progression of his criminal empire. "I kept everything," she told Walter during a clandestine meeting in a neighboring city. "Every memo, every threatening letter, every falsified document. I knew someday someone would be brave enough to stand up to him." She pulled out a heavy box filled with files, adding, "including what really happened to David Thompson." The evidence was devastating. Detailed records showed how Harrison had systematically targeted homeowners who refused to sell, using a network of corrupt officials to manufacture crises that forced them out. David Thompson's name appeared repeatedly in the months before his death, along with Harrison's handwritten notes about handling the problem permanently. Most damning was an email chain discussing brake line tampering, followed by payments to a mechanic who had since disappeared. The correspondence revealed not just David's murder, but a pattern of similar accidents arranged for other obstacles to Harrison's plans. The documents also exposed the full scope of Harrison's influence: judges on his payroll, police chiefs receiving kickbacks, hospital administrators enforcing his will through patient care manipulation. Even the recent campaign against the Thompsons was detailed in clinical precision strategies for isolation, psychological pressure points, targeted harassment. Walter worked through the night with his team, verifying every detail. By morning, they had constructed an airtight case that went far beyond real estate fraud. This was organized crime on a massive scale, with Harrison at the center of a web that had strangled the city for years. The evidence was too extensive to be buried or dismissed. Walter bypassed local authorities entirely, presenting the case directly to federal prosecutors. Within hours, FBI agents were executing search warrants across the city, targeting Harrison's associates and co-conspirators. Jake received the news while sitting with Anna during his restricted visiting time. Walter burst into the room, ignoring the protesting guards. "We've got him," he announced, his face alight with triumph. "Sarah Mitchell kept everything. Your father's murder, the corruption, all of it. The FBI is moving now." Through the hospital window, they watched Harrison's surveillance cars scatter as federal agents arrived. The guards who had restricted their visits disappeared, replaced by FBI protection details. Within hours, the hospital administrator who had tormented them was led out in handcuffs, along with board members who had enforced Harrison's will. Bradley arrived with his mother, bringing footage from Harrison Properties offices. They're arresting everyone, he reported, showing them his phone. Dad's whole network is falling apart. Some of his partners are already making deals, trying to save themselves. The most dramatic moment came when Sarah Mitchell's archive was made public. Local news stations, finally free from Harrison's influence, broadcast damning evidence around the clock. Citizens watched in horror as decades of corruption were exposed, recognizing how their city had been held hostage by one man's greed. Families who had lost homes, businesses, and loved ones to Harrison's schemes came forward with their stories. Each account reinforced the pattern David Thompson had died trying to expose. His murder was no longer an isolated tragedy, but part of a documented conspiracy that had claimed multiple victims. In the federal detention center, Richard Harrison faced the consequences of his unraveling empire. His lawyers, themselves implicated in the corruption, abandoned him. Former allies turned state's evidence, eager to save themselves. The man who had ruled through fear and intimidation found himself alone and afraid. For Jake, watching Harrison's fall brought complicated emotions. Justice for his father came with the painful knowledge of how preventable his death had been. If someone had acted sooner, had been brave enough to stand up earlier, David Thompson might still be alive. Anna, growing stronger as proper medical care was restored, drew a new picture: their family standing together, with David's spirit watching over them and Sarah Mitchell standing nearby with her box of truth. She helped Daddy finish his work, Anna explained simply. Sarah Mitchell visited them in the hospital, meeting the family whose lives her evidence had helped restore. "I was a coward for too long," she admitted, watching Anna draw. "Seeing your father stand up to Harrison, and then watching your family refuse to be broken, it gave me the courage to finally do the right thing." That evening, as Jake sat with his sister, Walter brought one final piece of evidence: David Thompson's last recorded conversation, preserved in Sarah's archives. Jake's hands trembled as he pressed play, hearing his father's voice for the first time in 5 years. "Harrison thinks fear can bury the truth," David's voice declared firmly, "but someday someone will be brave enough to expose everything. I hope my children understand that standing up for what's right is worth any cost. The truth always finds its light." Jake looked out the hospital window at the setting sun, thinking of all they had endured to fulfill his father's faith in truth's ultimate victory. The city was changing, healing as Harrison's shadow lifted. But the real victory was not just in exposing corruption, it was in proving that one family's courage could inspire others to finally stand against evil. As the full scope of Harrison's corruption came to light, the community that had shunned the Thompsons began a painful reckoning with their own complicity. The evidence exposed how fear and self-interest had turned neighbors against neighbors, allowing evil to flourish in their silence. Mrs. Chen was the first to return, bringing not just food but a petition signed by former residents of Harrison's Properties demanding her reinstatement in her apartment. Behind her came others: shopkeepers who had refused the Thompson service, teachers who had looked away, neighbors who had believed the lies. Mark appeared at the hospital with his parents, his face etched with shame. "We were cowards," his father admitted, looking at Anna's medical equipment. "We chose our mortgage over your lives. How do you even begin to apologize for something like that?" The local newspaper, freed from Harrison's influence, published a front-page apology for their role in suppressing the truth. They followed it with a comprehensive series documenting the community's failure to protect its most vulnerable members, featuring interviews with families destroyed by Harrison's schemes. The principal, who had threatened to expel Jake, now faced demands for his resignation after emails revealed his cooperation with Harrison's harassment campaign. In response, students organized a walkout, carrying signs supporting the Thompsons and demanding accountability from school administrators who had enabled bullying. Bradley's revelation about his father's crimes sparked a movement among other children of Harrison's associates. They began sharing their own stories of witnessing corruption, of being groomed to continue their parents' criminal enterprises, of the moral weight they carried as beneficiaries of others' suffering. The hospital board conducted emergency meetings, suspending staff who had participated in denying care to Anna and other patients on Harrison's orders. Dr. Reynolds was reinstated with an official apology and promotion to head of pediatrics, ensuring that such abuse of medical ethics could never happen again. Church leaders who had cancelled the community meeting faced their congregation's anger. The revelation that they had chosen Harrison's donations over moral responsibility led to soul-searching sermons about collective guilt and the cost of silence in the face of evil. Local business owners who had enforced Harrison's isolation tactics found themselves facing boycotts. Many responded by making public apologies and offering restitution to families they had helped victimize. The community's moral awakening carried economic consequences for those who had chosen complicity. The transformation was most visible in the changing treatment of Susan Thompson. News of her breakdown sparked outrage as people realized how their rejection had contributed to her collapse. Cards, letters, and gifts flooded the private facility where she was recovering, each one carrying messages of remorse and support. Former clients from her cleaning service organized a fund to cover her medical expenses, sharing stories of her dignity and kindness during their own difficult times. Her previous employer at the diner, who had fired her under Harrison's pressure, offered her part ownership as compensation for his cowardice. Jake watched this parade of repentance with mixed emotions. Each apology reopened wounds of betrayal while offering hope for healing. The community's guilt couldn't erase their abandonment during the darkest hours, but their awakening consciousness promised a better future. Mrs. Harrison became an unexpected voice for accountability, speaking publicly about the cost of privileged silence. "We who benefited from Richard's crimes share responsibility for every family he destroyed," she declared. "Our comfortable lives were built on others' suffering, and our silence made us accomplices." The most powerful moment came when the City Council convened a special session to formally apologize to the Thompson family. One by one, officials acknowledged their failures to investigate David's death, their surrender to Harrison's influence, their betrayal of public trust. As Jake sat in the council chamber, surrounded by the same people who had once shunned them, he thought about his father's words about truth finding its light. The community's awakening couldn't bring David back or erase their suffering, but it meant his father's sacrifice had finally forced people to confront their own moral compromises. Anna, watching from her hospital bed via livestream, drew a new picture of their neighborhood as a garden, with truth as the sun helping flowers grow through broken concrete. "Even bad dirt can grow good things," she explained, wisdom beyond her years shining in her eyes. The community's transformation from complicit silence to active responsibility marked a turning point in their city's healing. But for the Thompsons, rebuilding trust would be a longer journey, measured in small acts of redemption and the slow restoration of faith in human goodness. The national media descended on the city as the full scope of Harrison's crimes captured public attention. News vans lined the streets, reporters competed for interviews, and the Thompson family's story became a symbol of courage against corruption. What had begun as a local battle for justice evolved into a national conversation about power, accountability, and collective responsibility. Major networks produced hour-long specials documenting the family's fight. Footage of Jake giving away his last piece of bread to homeless Walter contrasted sharply with images of Harrison's luxurious lifestyle. Anna's medical ordeal and Susan's breakdown became powerful illustrations of how systemic corruption destroys innocent lives. Social media exploded with support. Justice for Thompsons trended nationally. People shared their own stories of facing institutional corruption, creating a movement that transcended city boundaries. The conversation shifted from one family's struggle to a broader examination of how wealth and power corrupt community bonds. Bradley's testimony became a viral sensation. His emotional account of discovering his father's crimes, choosing truth over family loyalty, resonated deeply with viewers. Young people especially connected with his struggle to break free from toxic inheritance and stand for justice. "My father taught me that power means never having to say sorry," Bradley told one interviewer, his voice steady. "But the Thompsons taught me that real strength is standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." Documentary filmmakers began piecing together David Thompson's investigation, tracing how one honest lawyer's quest for truth led to the exposure of decades-old crimes. They uncovered more victims, more stories of lives destroyed by Harrison's schemes, each one adding weight to the evidence David died protecting. Legal experts appeared on news shows explaining the complexity of Harrison's criminal enterprise. They highlighted how his corruption had infected every level of city governance, from school boards to hospital administration. The term Harrison effect entered the lexicon, describing how wealthy criminals manipulate community institutions to isolate their victims. The hospital where Anna was treated faced intense scrutiny. National medical associations launched investigations into how patient care became a weapon of intimidation. Healthcare advocacy groups used the case to push for reforms protecting vulnerable patients from institutional abuse. Educational organizations studied how the school system had enabled Bradley's bullying and punished Jake's resistance. The story became a case study in how institutional corruption trickles down to affect children, turning schools into environments where money dictates morality. Religious leaders nationwide addressed the moral implications of their local counterparts' failure to support the Thompsons. Sermons and articles explored how churches had chosen financial security over spiritual integrity, leading to soul-searching among faith communities about their role in fighting injustice. Investigative journalists dug deeper into Harrison Properties' history, uncovering similar patterns of corruption in other cities. What the Thompsons exposed in their community was revealed to be part of a larger network of real estate fraud and institutional corruption spanning multiple states. Susan's treatment facility received messages of support from around the country. Mental health professionals used her story to illustrate the psychological impact of systematic harassment and community abandonment. Her breakdown became a powerful testament to the human cost of fighting corruption alone. Walter's role in the investigation drew attention to the importance of privileged allies in fighting systemic injustice. Legal organizations studied his methods, developing new strategies for protecting whistleblowers and supporting families who challenge powerful interests. The media attention brought practical support as well. A national fundraising campaign covered Anna's medical bills and Susan's treatment costs. Law schools established scholarships in David Thompson's name for students committed to fighting corruption. Job offers poured in for Susan from companies eager to demonstrate their commitment to integrity. Through it all, Jake maintained his blog, now reaching a global audience. His simple, honest accounts of their ongoing journey touched readers worldwide. He wrote about forgiveness without forgetting, about healing without surrendering truth, about rebuilding community bonds stronger than fear. The public exposure brought security through visibility. Harrison's remaining allies couldn't touch the Thompsons without attracting immediate attention. The same media spotlight that illuminated their suffering now protected them from further retaliation. Yet the family remained grounded despite the attention. They declined reality TV offers and book deals, choosing instead to focus on healing and supporting other families fighting similar battles. Their story belonged to everyone seeking courage to stand against corruption. As public interest peaked, Jake received a letter from another teenager whose family was facing corporate corruption in their own community. "Your story showed us we're not alone," it read. "You gave us hope that fighting back isn't futile." That letter, more than all the media coverage, made Jake understand the true impact of their struggle. Their family's pain had become a beacon of hope for others, fulfilling David's belief that standing for truth was worth any cost. The federal courthouse was packed on the morning of Richard Harrison's sentencing. Jake sat between Walter and Mrs. Harrison in the front row, watching the man who had destroyed so many lives stand before justice. Anna, finally strong enough to leave the hospital, sat in her wheelchair holding Susan's hand, her presence a testament to their family's resilience. Harrison's empire had crumbled completely. The evidence from Sarah Mitchell's archive, combined with testimony from former associates seeking leniency, painted a devastating picture of decades of organized crime. The prosecution had documented 47 suspicious deaths connected to Harrison properties, including David Thompson's murder. When Harrison entered the courtroom, he barely resembled the powerful figure who had terrorized their community. His designer suits were replaced by prison orange, his commanding presence diminished by months in detention. Yet his eyes still held that calculating coldness as they swept across the gathered crowd. The judge, a federal appointee beyond Harrison's influence, began by addressing the victims' families. This court has heard testimony describing a criminal enterprise that treated human lives as obstacles to profit. Today we declare that no amount of wealth can place anyone above justice. The prosecution presented their final summary: 27 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, hundreds of instances of fraud, corruption, and racketeering. Each charge was supported by meticulous documentation, many bearing Harrison's own signature. The evidence David Thompson died protecting had finally served its purpose. Harrison's defense crumbled as former allies turned against him. His own accountant detailed the complex money laundering schemes. City officials admitted to accepting bribes. Even his personal driver testified about driving Harrison to meet with the mechanic who sabotaged David's brakes. The most damning testimony came from Bradley, who described growing up watching his father destroy families while teaching him that power meant never facing consequences. "He wanted me to inherit his empire," Bradley stated, his voice steady despite his father's glare. "Instead, I chose to inherit the courage of those who fought him." When Harrison was offered a chance to speak, his true nature emerged one final time. Instead of remorse, he offered threats. "You think this ends with me? Money still rules everything. Someone else will take my place, and these noble warriors for truth will find themselves just as alone." The judge's response was unequivocal. "Mr. Harrison, your remarks demonstrate precisely why the maximum sentence is not just appropriate but necessary." She proceeded to hand down multiple life terms without possibility of parole, plus restitution to victims that would strip the Harrison family of its ill-gotten wealth. As Harrison was led away, he passed close to Jake's seat. For a moment their eyes met. Jake saw not a monster but a hollow man who had sacrificed his humanity for power. "My father was worth 1,000 of you," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying in the hushed courtroom. Harrison's mask slipped, showing a flash of fear as he finally confronted the truth: he had lost everything to the very people he thought he could break. His own son stood with them, his wife had testified against him, and his empire had crumbled before a family's refusal to surrender truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to hear victim impact statements. Susan, supported by her children, spoke about David's legacy of courage. "My husband believed that standing for truth was worth any cost. Today proves he was right. The light of truth has finally burned away the darkness of corruption." Walter addressed questions about the broader implications of the case. "This verdict sends a message that resonates beyond our city. Money can buy influence, but it can't ultimately defeat justice when people stand together against corruption." Mrs. Harrison, standing beside Bradley, announced the conversion of Harrison Properties assets into a foundation supporting families fighting corporate corruption. "We can't undo the past," she declared, "but we can help ensure no other family faces such battles alone." As the crowd dispersed, Jake noticed Sarah Mitchell standing quietly at the edges. He walked over to the woman whose courage had helped deliver justice. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping my father finish what he started." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Your father's sacrifice and your family's courage gave me the strength to finally do what was right. Sometimes the truth just needs witnesses willing to speak." Back in Anna's hospital room that evening, the family gathered to watch the news coverage. The headlines declared justice served and corruption empire falls, but Jake focused on his sister's newest drawing, their family, whole and smiling, with David's spirit watching proudly over them. "Is it really over?" Anna asked, coloring in the sun above their heads. Jake looked at his mother, seeing peace replacing pain in her eyes, then at the camera crews still visible through the window, ensuring their story would protect others facing similar battles. "The fight against corruption is never completely over," he answered thoughtfully. "But Dad showed us how to win by standing together, speaking truth, and never letting fear silence justice." The months following Harrison's sentencing brought profound changes to the community. Where fear and self-interest had once ruled, a new spirit of solidarity emerged. The transformation began with a community-wide reconciliation ceremony held in the park where David Thompson had once organized neighborhood gatherings. Hundreds gathered to acknowledge their collective failure and commit to rebuilding. Former Harrison employees shared stories of coercion and redemption. Families who had turned against the Thompsons offered public apologies. Even those who had simply remained silent stepped forward to acknowledge their passive complicity in Harrison's reign. The school underwent a complete reformation. The principal resigned, replaced by an educator committed to ethical leadership. Bradley's anti-bullying initiative became a model program, teaching students to recognize and resist systemic corruption. The hallways where Jake had once faced isolation now displayed murals celebrating moral courage and community unity. Mark's family led a neighborhood restoration project, starting with Mrs. Chen's apartment. Local businesses donated materials and labor to repair years of deliberate neglect. The work became a symbol of hands-on redemption, with former antagonists working side by side to rebuild what Harrison had destroyed. The hospital established the Anna Thompson Patient Advocacy Program, ensuring that medical care could never again be weaponized against vulnerable families. Dr. Reynolds headed the initiative, implementing protocols that prioritized patient welfare over institutional politics. The guards who had restricted Anna's visitors were replaced by patient advocates trained to protect rights rather than enforce control. Susan's return from treatment marked a turning point in community healing. Her former clients organized a welcome home celebration that became a catalyst for deeper reconciliation. People who had shunned her now lined up to share meals, offer support, and rebuild broken bonds of trust. The diner where Susan had once worked became a gathering place for families sharing stories of survival and recovery. The owner, having confronted his own role in enabling Harrison's persecution, transformed the space into a community hub where people could freely discuss concerns without fear of retaliation. Local churches established a support network for whistleblowers and families challenging corruption, naming it after David Thompson. Religious leaders who had once prioritized donations over moral authority now preached active resistance to institutional evil, backed by practical assistance for those taking ethical stands. Bradley and his mother converted the Harrison mansion into a community center, its imposing gates replaced by welcoming gardens. Programs offering legal aid, counseling, and advocacy training operated from rooms that had once housed conspiracy and corruption. The transformation of this symbol of oppression into a resource for justice became a powerful metaphor for community renewal. The City Council, under new leadership, passed the Thompson Transparency Act, requiring public disclosure of all corporate influence in local governance. Regular town halls replaced closed-door meetings, and citizen oversight committees ensured that development projects served community needs rather than private profits. Jake's blog evolved into a community platform where people shared resources and organized support for families facing similar challenges. The solidarity that had emerged from their struggle became a model for other communities battling institutional corruption, with Jake often invited to speak about building resistance through unity. Anna's recovery became a communal celebration. Her hospital room, once a place of isolation, filled with visitors bringing art supplies, books, and hope. Her drawings, depicting scenes of community healing, decorated the pediatric ward, reminding everyone that even the youngest victims of corruption could become agents of change. Walter established a legal clinic specializing in corporate accountability, training a new generation of lawyers in the principles David Thompson had died defending. The clinic offered free services to families challenging systemic abuse, ensuring that financial constraints could never again silence voices of truth. Mrs. Harrison's testimony about her journey from complicity to conscience inspired other privileged community members to examine their own roles in perpetuating injustice. Her candid acknowledgement that comfort had made her complicit led to the formation of accountability groups where the wealthy confronted their responsibility to challenge corruption. The media attention gradually shifted from exposing past crimes to documenting community transformation. Reporters who had once ignored Harrison's abuses now investigated other instances of corporate corruption, creating a culture of vigilance that made future exploitation more difficult. As spring arrived, the community organized a memorial garden in David Thompson's honor. Families he had helped contributed plants and memories, creating a living testament to the power of one person's commitment to truth. Jake often found quiet moments there, sensing his father's presence in the peaceful space where healing grew from the soil of shared suffering. The garden's centerpiece, a simple plaque, bore words from David's final journal entry, "Truth needs witnesses willing to stand together." Around it, the community that had rediscovered its conscience gathered regularly, ensuring that the lessons of their collective failure and redemption would guide future generations. 1 year after Harrison's sentencing, the Thompson family gathered in their new home, a modest house with a red door and flower boxes, just like in Anna's drawings. The living room walls displayed photographs telling their story: David's proud law school graduation, Jake giving bread to Walter, Anna's first steps after leaving the hospital, and Susan's triumphant return home. The occasion was both a celebration and a dedication. The Thompson Foundation, funded by recovered Harrison assets, was launching its first nationwide program to support families fighting corporate corruption. Representatives from similar struggles across the country had come to share their stories and find strength in unity. Anna, fully recovered and glowing with health, moved through the crowd, sharing her latest drawing, scenes of hope and healing that captured their journey from darkness to light. Her artistic talent, nurtured during long hospital days, had blossomed into a powerful voice for children affected by institutional abuse. Susan, standing at the podium they'd set up in the backyard, looked nothing like the broken woman who had once clutched a teddy bear in despair. Her voice carried strength and wisdom as she addressed the gathered families. Our victory isn't just about justice served. It's about the power of truth to transform communities when people stand together. Bradley and his mother sat among the guests, no longer carrying the Harrison name, but wearing their choice of conscience with pride. They had dedicated themselves to helping other families break free from cycles of corruption, turning their inherited privilege into a force for positive change. Mark and his parents helped serve refreshments, their simple acts of hospitality representing the everyday courage of neighbors choosing solidarity over self-preservation. The community that had once shunned the Thompsons now stood as an example of collective redemption. Walter watched from the side. His mission evolved from seeking justice to ensuring its persistence. The legal clinic he'd established had already helped dozens of families stand against corporate abuse, creating a network of support that Harrison had once thought impossible. Mrs. Chen moved through the crowd sharing her dumplings, now famous as the food of resistance that had sustained hope during their darkest days. Each person who took one heard the story of how small acts of kindness could break through the walls of isolation. Jake took the podium last, holding his father's journal. "A year ago, we stood in a courtroom and watched justice prevail. But the real victory wasn't Harrison's imprisonment. It was discovering that truth needs more than witnesses. It needs a community brave enough to stand together." He opened the journal to its final page, reading words that had guided their struggle. "To my children, some will tell you that fighting corruption is hopeless, that money always wins. But remember, evil only triumphs when good people choose safety over solidarity. Your greatest power lies not in standing alone, but in standing together. Looking out at the gathered faces, victims turned advocates, bystanders turned allies, enemies turned friends, Jake saw his father's vision realized. The truth had not only found its light, it had kindled a flame that would guide others out of darkness. As the sun set on their gathering, Anna unveiled her latest masterpiece, a mural depicting their journey. It showed not just their family's struggle, but the transformation of an entire community. From the darkness of Harrison's corruption emerged scenes of healing, unity, and renewed purpose. The evening ended with a candlelight vigil in David's memorial garden. Each person lit a candle, sharing how the Thompsons' story had inspired their own fights for justice. The flames formed a circle of light, pushing back the darkness just as truth had pushed back corruption. In that moment, standing between his mother and sister, surrounded by the community that had learned to choose courage over comfort, Jake felt his father's presence. David Thompson's death had planted seeds of truth that grew into a forest of resistance, proving that one family's stand for justice could transform countless lives. The light of their candles reflected in Anna's eyes as she whispered, "Daddy would be proud of us, wouldn't he?" Jake squeezed her hand, watching the flames dance in the growing dusk. "He was always proud of us," he replied. "Now we've made him proud of our whole community." Their story had become more than a tale of justice served. It was a testament to the power of unwavering truth, unbreakable family bonds, and the profound healing that becomes possible when a community chooses to stand together against corruption. As night fell and stars emerged above the garden, their light seemed to mirror the candles below, countless points of brightness pushing back the darkness, just as countless acts of courage had transformed their community from a place of fear to a beacon of hope. Dear valued viewers, your thoughts on this powerful story of resilience and justice matter deeply to us. Please share your own experiences and reflections in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to support our team's commitment to bringing meaningful narratives to light. Every subscription encourages us to continue sharing stories that matter. Help spread this message of hope and courage by sharing this video with friends and family. Your likes and engagement enable us to reach more people with stories that inspire positive change. Thank you for being part of this journey toward truth and justice.